Hey YouTube! 2 years ago, I tried to launch a video game review series, and then I didn't publish it. I have 3 episodes. Here's the first one.
Once upon a time, there was an awesome Steam sale, and I was like, oh man, look at all these games I have to buy! But then my wife was like, don't you have hundreds of unplayed games left over from that last sale? And I was like, oh yeah. Right. Now I'm trying to play every one of my forgotten purchases to see what I've missed. Oh, and I'm doing it alphabetically. It's the Alphabetical Backlog Challenge, and this is Game 1, Alan Wake. I have to admit, when this came up first on my list, I don't remember much about Alan Wake when it was first being advertised, but I have a vague recollection of it being some kind of Heavy Rain type thriller mystery. I was never very interested, and I honestly have no idea how I wound up owning a copy of it. Maybe it was part of some sort of Humble Bundle. Whatever the case, I'm stuck with it now. I started making this video as one of those Let's Play things that are so popular these days, but it just wasn't working out for me. As part of the horror genre, it relies on being creepy and shocking the player, and I don't really jump or react to these kinds of games, so it was a little dry, and also the game's really long. I mean, look, it's an axe murder derived from the novelist's main character's writings, and lighthouse. That's the logical place to go immediately after crashing your car into a magical disappearing hobo. Whatever, it just doesn't grab me as an interesting enough game to support a ton of videos documenting every moment of gameplay, so I'm just gonna skip around, talk about a few things that got my attention, and move on to the next game. Maybe that's wrong, but hey, I really don't have any idea what I'm doing. Hopefully you'll stick around until I figure it out. The first chapter of the game is called Nightmare, which makes sense because the game's tutorial is also a dream. Our hero learns the game's play mechanics and has the hook of the story spoiled. His latest novel has come to life and it's trying to kill him. Also, it's very judgmental.
There would be a single readable sentence in your books if it wasn't for you.
That's pretty harsh. I mean, yeah, it's probably true. A lot of great books would have flopped if it wasn't for a good editor. But I mean, it's coming from a guy who only exists because of the story. Eventually, Alan wakes up in the sleepy mountain town of terrible lip syncing and immediately goes to work being a dick to everyone. I really mean it. He's a dick to the guy in the boat, he's a dick to the fan he meets in the diner, and then he's a dick to his wife. I mean, seriously, Wake's a completely unlikable guy. Part of the story leans on how he has writer's block and how his wife takes him on vacation hoping it'll clear his head and then he'll be able to work again. And then when he finds out she's trying to help him, he flips out and yells at her, and then he uses her fear of the dark to get out of the argument and runs out into the night. I mean, as the plot progresses, his wife gets kidnapped and he gets amnesia, and it's up to the player to figure out what's going on, but it's kind of hard for me to care. And in a game that clearly wants to have an engaging narrative, a completely unlikable character is a problem for me. I don't care about Alan, so it's really hard for me to care about the story. The gameplay itself is fine. I mean, you blind a bunch of ghosts or whatever with light, and you shoot them until they explode, and that's fun, and there are things to collect, and that's fun, but 10 minutes into the game, I just didn't care because I didn't like Alan. I don't expect him to develop, I don't really care if he does develop, and I mean, I think I'm supposed to relate to his frustration over having writer's block and not being worthy of his fame, which I get because I kind of write for a living, but he's so unkind about it that I sort of want to see him fail. Why should I root for this guy to recover? He's a jerk! I do like how the game forces the main character's amnesia on the player. Alan apparently wrote a book and then forgot about it, and you keep finding pages of it all over town. You'll find a page that'll describe a scene, and then it'll happen later in the game, and that's kind of cool. I mean, the story idea itself isn't that bad. It actually reminds me of watching old episodes of The Twilight Zone. It's a seemingly normal world, and there's a weird twist, and everything gets turned upside down. There's actually a parody of the show running on the in-game TV, so that parallel was probably intentional, and it's kind of cool to watch the little episodes. I mean, they're terrible, but they're there. The first chapter of the game is mostly about getting from a car crash to a gas station. You gotta take Alan through a lumberyard where he's attacked by a bunch of, darkness zombies or whatever, and they're afraid of light, and that's pretty fun, but I kept feeling like it was a waste of time. You can see the gas station right from where the car crashes. I mean, there's a big creek and ravine in the way, and Alan would have to do some rock climbing to get under the bridge or over it or whatever, but it felt to me like he was taking the long way around. I even tried to go off the path, but it wasn't an option. In fact, going the long way around seems to be a theme in how Alan Wake's levels are laid out. Every chapter is a relatively simple objective, like meet the kidnappers or get to the power plant, but there's always some half-baked reason Alan can't take the most direct route. This lets the player encounter enemies and solve puzzles, but I found it really off-putting to have to hike through the woods just to get to a place that was only a few minutes away by car. If you trudge through these long trails between plot advancements, you'll usually be rewarded with a cutscene. But I can't show those because YouTube's Content ID system keeps flagging them as owned by Studio Suez, an entity that seems to be completely unrelated to Remedy Games. I mean, you've heard of YouTube copyright fraud? Well, here it is. As the game moves forward, more and more supernatural elements kind of worm their way into the plot. While the game's well-paced and interesting, I think the Twilight Zone comparison really stands. It's interesting, yeah, but fairly shallow overall, and elements of the gameplay contradict the villain's motives. The dark entity that's messing with your life and kidnapping your wife and creating these zombies, for instance, needs to capture Alan so he'll finish writing a cursed manuscript that'll set it free. But it also spends the entire game trying to kill him with axe-wielding darkness zombies. I mean, that really seems counterproductive. The only portion of the game where the motive pans out is a story sequence where the town psychiatrist is trying to convince you that you've suffered a psychotic episode after your wife drowned, and you're under professional care and observation, and I kind of just wish the game ended there. The notion of the entire thing being a madman's way of coping for loss may be overplayed, but it was interesting, and actually provides more closure than the game's real ending. It's also a shame that parts of the combat detract from that plot, because other elements that are really symbolic. Yeah, there's the obvious light and dark contrast of the flashlight, but what really caught my interest is how it draws a parallel to the child's fear of the dark. It's like when you were a kid and your mind would twist the shadows of your bedroom into terrifying monsters, but the instant you shined a light on them, they disappeared. It's the same thing with the flying refrigerators, tractors, and train cars and stuff in the game. They're just harmless objects, but it takes the brightness of daylight or your flashlight to reveal it. Basing gameplay elements on a base childhood fear that everyone has is kind of clever. If I was legitimately afraid of the dark, the game would probably terrify me. Of course, this element kind of hits a snag when you realize Alan isn't afraid of the dark at all. The flashlight's really just a weapon to him, and he seems curious and annoyed by the monsters and the darkness objects, but he never shows any fear of them. To Alan, they're just obstacles, and I think that really detracts from the terror the game wanted to imply. Besides, you can usually just hide behind a tree. Rather than spoil the game's lackluster ending, let's just skip on ahead to Game 2 on my enormous list, Alan Wake's American Nightmare. Nightmare is interesting because it's both more streamlined than the original title and more shallow. It focuses on combat, action, and clear, simple directives, but the story seems more disjointed and incomplete. Where the original title stepped on its narrative for the sake of gameplay, Nightmare discards any attempt to tell an engrossing story at all. In fact, it seems to take place in the game's Twilight Zone parody show, including more action, more weapons, and a cheesy plot littered with holes. In some ways, it's almost better, because if it's just, by making it a mindless action title with the gameplay mechanics, you can have fun with it and you don't have to worry about the stupid story. I mean, now the story is intentionally written badly, and, well, that makes it more fun and casual. It's not trying to creep me out anymore, it's just trying to provide me with a reason to shoot zombies, which is what the first game was trying to do anyway, but the zombies got in the way of the story. So just get rid of the story and just keep the zombies, and it kind of feels a little bit more like a more cohesive title. Which is weird because Nightmare's plot is worse than the original Wake, but the characters in game's writings, the pages you find, they're written so much better. Anyway, it's not really a better game, but it is more streamlined. I know this game series has its fans, but I wasn't really into it. The Resident Evil 4 vibe of the gameplay is fun, but the clashes between gameplay and story just put me off. I think the best way to experience this franchise would probably be to read the Alan Wake novel adaptation and then play American Nightmare, which is shorter and more streamlined. Then in theory you could enjoy the story and gameplay in separate arenas where they can both shine on their own. Unless the book is terrible. Then I guess you're just screwed. Next time we'll check out Alice, Madness Returns, and maybe tweak with the format, try some traditional Let's Play segments, and hopefully get away from the horror genre for a while. I'm still working out how I want to do everything on this channel. Got any suggestions? Drop them in the YouTube comments and tell me how terrible I am. Also, like or subscribe or whatever. I think that's how YouTube works. Right? Right, guys? Right?
That's the Alphabetical Backlog Challenge. If you like it, let me know. I've got 2 more episodes, and maybe I'll keep doing it. If you don't, tough. I'm publishing it anyway. What are you doing watching this? Subscribe. Go on.